Well, good morning everyone, and welcome to this crisp, cold morning here in the countryside. I'm out shooting with the Fuji today. I suppose I should take this opportunity to say hello to all my new subscribers after that previous video that I did about the Fuji. Welcome on board. I'm Craig, and yes, I now shoot Fuji amongst other cameras. I suppose I should also say goodbye to some of my Olympus followers too, because it seemed to cause a bit of a stir that I bought this camera and swapped over from Olympus. Not everybody's happy that I've done that. It was a bit strange, and they seem to be blaming me or letting them down in some way. But what I will say to those that are still here, those still watching, is that just because I've moved from Olympus to Fuji doesn't mean you should now lose heart in the system. And I know many of you went to Olympus because you saw that I had bought into Olympus. And just because I've decided to try a different camera system shouldn't mean you lose the confidence, so continue to love it as you always have. Remember, I didn't leave Olympus because of poor image quality. It was more about the ergonomics of the camera that I wanted. But what's done is done, and hopefully you will stay because of me, not just because of the camera I'm using. And as I say, hello to my new followers, new subscribers, which I guess are Fuji users. Well, this is what I do. Now I guess I'm shooting with 3 different camera systems. When I want a really lightweight setup, it's the Ricos. For primes, it's the new Fuji. But when I'm shooting zooms, I've still got my Olympus EM1 Mark II. So I haven't left the brand totally. I've still got confidence in it and the image quality it produces. And if you are new to this channel, then maybe I should take this opportunity to explain who I am. So I'm a travel and landscape photographer, but I suppose I bias my photography towards the city. I love shooting in urban environments, but I like coming into the countryside too. But my landscape photography isn't so much the traditional one. I don't tend to seek out the traditional views, the pretty landscapes, the wide open vistas. I like to embrace the other side of the landscape. The pylons, the wind turbines, telegraph poles, eyesores, anything that you'd normally want to exclude from a landscape. That's what I like to photograph. I see the prettiness in them. The pretty landscapes are probably easier to photograph. The eyesores and the not so glamorous ones are more of a challenge. I like a challenge. I also don't do many talky bits to cameras as I'm walking along because I just seem to get out of breath too much. So for instance, here's a line of telegraph poles that I've been following up that centre section. And I love the line they're creating down through those trees. A little bit of hoarfrost on the trees this morning, especially these ones on the right. So there's 2 possible views to do from here. This isn't the best example, but I do like this. If you're looking all the way down the middle there, you've got the darker trees either side, but that telegraph pole down the middle there, the other trees, the whiter trees behind it. Or there's this other view off to the right where you're using these other slightly hoarfrosty trees leading in from the right hand side, but the telegraph pole where it's surrounded by those fir trees. Now that's beauty to me. That's wonderful. That's not a traditional view, but there's something about that, you've got to admit. So this morning I've come for a walk on the edge of the North Yorkshire Moors, a traditionally pretty location. But I'm not necessarily seeking out those pretty views that most people would walk past, the eyesores and the the less attractive views to get to. I'm walking past the scenic views to get to those unattractive views that people have walked past, if you see what I mean. So I think there's more to a landscape than just the romantic pretty view, and I think even if you come for that, you should be looking for everything else that comes along with that along the way. Along these routes there's lots more views to do. If you've just come for that one shot and it's not that perfect light that you want, I'd rather go home with other shots that I've worked hard at rather than go home with nothing. And I suppose in the past I would approach my urban landscapes just as I would my rural landscapes, but now I've kind of flipped that, and the way I approach my urban landscapes is now how I approach my rural landscapes. Yeah, but it makes sense to me anyway. And I suppose with that theory, when I'm shooting in the urban landscape in the city, I could easily come home with 50 unique images. In the landscape it's probably less, but it's very rare that I'll come home with nothing. Even if there is no scenic view to be done, even if the light isn't great, I usually come home with at least 3 good alternative shots, and that's what I aim for. I'm not going to return home with nothing. It's just a waste of a day. And if you do embrace the less scenic view as well as the standard pretty view, you're probably more likely to come home with a unique shot that someone hasn't done before. So this is quite nice. Now that I'm heading out these woods, I'm going back to the road now. I've had to climb this steep incline, but the sun's just coming through now, so we've got a bit of a light and shade with the trees. You've got these 3 distinct trunks here and the path leading down, but there's a nice mixture of these trees here. So I'm thinking possibly a slight panoramic. I'm not sure about black and white. Maybe it could go to black and white. It could work in colour and black and white, but for me, if it was colour, it would probably be a desaturated colour. But yeah, possibly a 16:9 across there. And that's not a bad view down there. It's kind of something out of nothing, which pretty much sums me up really. So I've reached the top of the hill now, and I suppose the views from up here are rather nice, pretty views. Of course they don't really do much for me, but I will film them for you because I'm sure you will appreciate them. Although the layered effect going on here is rather nice, I guess. And this view down here with the path leading down that I've just walked up, that tree with the landscape behind, yeah, I quite like that. That's acceptable. That's not too pretty. That's within my range. But if you would class that as a pretty view, then just don't tell anybody. Don't dob me in. Oh, and the view over here does raise an interesting point as well, because that's more of a telephoto view, but it's kind of the limits to my own telephoto view. So I'm shooting with the Fuji 50mm, which is kind of 75mm full frame, and I'm punching in with the sports finder mode at 1.29 times, which makes it around 100mm lens focal length view, and that's kind of my limit. I shoot my landscapes at 24mm maximum, usually 35 these days, but I'll go to 24, but not usually any wider. And my telephoto views probably end around the 110 millimeter focal range. I don't see the distant views any further than that. So it's 24 to around 100. I prefer using the primes than a zoom, but that's my kind of range of how I see things. But my default, just like it is in the city, is around 35 millimeter. That's my natural landscape view. But it is a nice spot up here, isn't it? I can appreciate the views, the stunning landscape, even if I'm not taking a photograph of it. I like being in the landscape. Well, I suppose this being my first video shoot with the XT5, or my first YouTube video shoot, you'd like to know what I think of the camera. Has it lived up to expectations? And the answer is yeah, I like it. I like all the dials. I'm kind of using the front and back command dials rather than the top dials. So I have the aperture ring on A and using the front dial instead. I like the flip up screen. I like the flip up vertical screen. I like being able to punch into the sensor to give a tighter frame in camera with the lens I'm using. So for instance, this 50mm, I punch in to give a 1.29 crop in using the sports mode, as I said later, ready to crop later on. I prefer to shoot and compose with that in camera, so it means I don't have to change lenses so often, as I do see this as a prime lens camera. But it's nice, it's comfortable to hold, good to hold, not too big, not too bulky, bigger than a Pen F but feels smaller than my EM1 because of the smaller grip. And yeah, I like it. As I say, the viewfinder could be a bit more high res, especially when you start punching into that crop, or the 1.4 and 2 times crop, where it loses that definition in the viewfinder. But there you go. Yeah, it's a nice camera to use. It's not perfect, but then neither was my Olympus cameras. So yeah, there's pluses and there's minuses, and I suppose the only way for you to find out if this camera was for you is to try it for yourself. It's the only way I've been able to find out. I know what I want it to be doing, and most of the time it does. So I'm keeping with Fuji at the moment, but it's not a zoom lens camera, not for me. But I must admit, I have been using my 2 Ricoh cameras more than I've been using this camera since I bought it. But it's nice to have those 2 different size and types of cameras for different situations. All in all, including my film cameras, I've got a nice range of cameras that, well, most importantly, I'm enjoying using them all. Oh, and one last thing, this is to my new subscribers. You'll notice today that I didn't use a tripod for my shots. I don't tend to use a tripod in the landscape these days, not if I can help it. Always used to, but not anymore. And I think that probably contributes to the kind of shots that I take these days. Or as I like to call it, more fluid, less static. I know what you're waiting for. I know what you think is going to happen. You're just waiting, aren't you? You mean things. It's not going to happen. It's not slippery at all. Must have melted. Not going to happen.